Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to let folks join and we'll get started here in a few minutes. Thanks for joining, everyone. Today, we're going to give it one more minute and then we'll get started. Good afternoon. Happy Monday. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Tara Britton. I'm the Director of Public Policy and Advocacy at the Center for Community Solutions. And we are really excited to share with you all today more information about our legislative district fact sheets. I'm going to turn it over to our President and Executive Director, John Corlett, to kick off the webinar.
Thanks, Tara, and thanks to everybody for joining us today for this webinar, Ohio Legislative Fact Sheets, the what, the how, and the why. I have to say this is one of my favorite products, I guess I'd call it, that the Center for Community Solution produces. You know, we do these for all sorts of different geographic areas and districts, but I like them because it helps make data more transparent and accessible to everybody, and that we think everybody can make use of this data. I also want to thank Angela and Alex from our research team who are with us today. They did the hard work of basically taking thousands of data points and boiling them down into 2-page fact sheets, which is no small feat, particularly after all the challenges with the U.S. Census. And then I also want to thank Sarah Hudacek, who's here from Advocates for Ohio's Future. She's going to put a little advocacy spin on this and talk about how you might think about using these fact sheets, as you interact with policymakers and others around the state. The one thing we'd ask is if you have questions, and we welcome questions, is that you put those in the Q&A, and we'll take those at the end of the program. This is about a 1-hour program, but that's all from me, and I want to turn it over to my colleague, Angela. Thanks, Em.
Well, thank you, John, and good afternoon, everyone. In putting together these legislative fact sheets, the Center for Community Solutions set out to provide the best data available to legislators, community partners, advocates, any and all community decision makers. The best available data encompasses data that is relevant, reliable, timely, and granular. In the case of the legislative fact sheets, relevant data includes indicators that relate to the status of constituents, especially in the health and human service areas that the Center for Community Solutions focuses on. These include demographics such as age, race, and education. Terry, you might want to flip the slide. educational attainment, as well as data on employment, poverty, housing affordability, and public benefits access. The best source for this relevant data is the American Community Survey. The American Community Survey is produced by the U.S. Census Bureau, so it's from a reputable data source. Unlike the decennial U.S. Census, which takes place once every 10 years, the American Community Survey is conducted with a sample of U.S. residents every month and collects data around population and housing topics. The U.S. Census Bureau releases the American Community Survey in 1-year and 5-year estimates. The 5-year estimates offer more robust data, especially at smaller population and geographic levels, and are a preferred data source. Next slide. Because it is collected on an ongoing basis, the American Community Survey is timely. The U.S. Census Bureau releases each 5-year estimate within the end of a calendar year. For the legislative fact sheets, we use the American Community Survey 5-year estimates from 2017 to 2021, which is the most recent American Community Survey data available. Another key requirement for any project is that the data is available at the appropriate granular level. For the legislative fact sheets, this meant that the data would be available at the level of legislative districts, which proved to be one of the greatest challenges in putting these fact sheets together. These images on the screen are from the Ohio Secretary of State website and show the current districts in the state of Ohio. Next slide. The U.S. Census Bureau makes the American Community Survey data available at a variety of geographic levels, including each state's upper and lower legislative chambers. In Ohio, the Ohio Senate, our upper legislative chamber, and the Ohio House of Representatives, our lower legislative chamber, are the two chambers. However, Ohio's legislative districts were redrawn in response to the 2020 census and are only temporarily approved. Due to this situation, the American Community Survey data available for Ohio's legislative chambers does not match the current and temporarily approved districts in Ohio. To work around this hurdle, we use block groups to build sets of data for each legislative district. Block groups are the smallest geography for which American Community Survey data is available. A block is the smallest census geography, and legislative districts are made up of blocks, but American Community Survey data is not available all the way down to the block level. Instead, it is available at block groups, which generally contain between 600 and 3,000 people. There are 9,472 block groups in Ohio. We use spatial analysis to assign each block group to both an Ohio House and Senate district. We took a map of all 9,472 block groups in Ohio and overlaid the map of the current Ohio House districts. We assigned each block group a House district based on in which district the majority of the geographic area of the block group was located. We repeated this process for the Senate districts, which is the next slide, so that each block group was assigned both an Ohio House and Senate district number. We tried more than one type of spatial analysis to assign the block groups to districts. For example, we tried assigning block groups based on in which district the center of the block group was located. We found that assigning block groups based on the location of the majority of the geographic area yielded the closest results to actual district boundaries. On the next slide, you can see a close-up of Senate District number 1, and you can see how while block groups do not line up perfectly with legislative district boundaries, they come very close and are certainly more accurate than using data available at a county level. My colleague Alex Dorman will walk through developing the data once each block group was assigned a district. To close my portion, though, I want to reiterate the benefits and limitations of using the American Community Survey as our data source. The American Community Survey is the only data source at our disposal that offered relevant, timely, reliable, and appropriately granular data to put together the legislative fact sheets. This data is not perfect. In fact, the 5-year estimates are intended to be a robust data source because they smooth out years with extreme results. When there are strong trends within the data, the 5-year estimates will understate those trends. For example, we are aware that the fact sheets undercount the number of Ohioans served by Medicaid in 2021. This is likely a combination of the self-reporting by survey takers, upward trend in enrollment, and differing timeframes for the data collection and reporting. The American Community Survey asks about current status, whereas the Ohio Department of Medicaid reports on an entire year. We are aware of other sources for some of this data, but often these sources are not available for all parts of the state or for more recent timeframes in the American Community Survey. For more information on this topic, please check out a blog posted today by my colleague Emily Campbell titled, "Did we undercount Medicaid numbers? 4 examples of data limitations." It can be found on the Center for Community Solutions website or linked in our weekly 5 Things You Need to Know newsletter. Links to both the blog and to sign up for 5 Things You Need to Know are being posted in the chat. Most importantly, for the legislative district fact sheets, no other data source offered information on relevant indicators at a level that could be used to create a complete set of fact sheets for all legislative districts. And with that, I turn the presentation over to Alex Dorman to dive into the data.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alex Dorman. I'm a research fellow here at the Center for Community Solutions. And I want to thank you so much, Angela, for talking about the ways in which we were able to build these districts. And I'm going to take a moment just to talk about how we took those building blocks and downloaded all this data and compiled this data into meaningful information. So in thinking about how we use the American Community Survey data to create these profiles, I think it can be helpful to kind of visualize this process as something like putting together a puzzle. So as Angela mentioned, there are 9,472 block groups within the state of Ohio. And each of those groups are kind of like little puzzle pieces with their own bits of data that all need to be compiled together to make the complete comprehensive districts. So for context, in thinking about the number of puzzle pieces in a district, there are 99 House districts in Ohio. What we found is there's about an average of 95 block groups within each district. But of course, that's an average. Some districts had up to as many as 286 block groups with, 153 block groups in one of those House districts. And then there are 33 Senate districts with an average of 286 block groups, with one district having as many as 395 block groups. So it makes sense. The Senate districts have more block groups in them because they are much larger. And for an example, I'm going to take a look at the next slide. We're going to go back to Senate District 1 here, which Angela showed us a little earlier. And what you see here is each of those little puzzle pieces within that district, each comes with their own piece of data. And this is Senate District 1, which had 305 block groups that needed to be compiled to get a complete picture of the district. So on to the next slide. I'm going to focus a little bit about how we did that. And I'll try to make this as not boring as possible because it was a whole lot of data. And the first step was downloading all the raw data for the state of Ohio. Every data point that we were interested in for each of our indicators, we needed to download over those 9,000 block groups. And we had to reorganize that data. And for each one of those block groups, they come with something called a geographic ID or a GeoID. We had to match that GeoID to a set of GeoIDs that we created that correspond to the different districts. So for example, in Senate District 1, which we just looked at, we had grouped all 305 relevant GeoIDs together and then pooled that information from the large list of 9,000 block groups to then put all that information together, sum it, and then turn it into percentages that we could work with. And for people who are familiar with Excel, what that actually means was something like thousands and thousands of VLOOKUP functions. So it was tedious, but it was the best way that we were able to take those 9,000 plus block groups and reorganize them into the necessary House and Senate districts. So now that I've talked a little bit about how we actually compiled some of this data, I want to talk just a moment in some of the ways that we're interested at Community Solutions in putting this information together, and especially for researchers like Angela and I, mapping is one of our favorite things to do with this kind of information. So here is an example of a map that I put together. This is a chloropleth map. And what it's doing is it's mapping the percentage of residents by House districts that are living below the federal poverty line. So I'm sure plenty of the people on this call are very familiar with how the FPL is measured, but for those of us who aren't, for a single person to be below the federal poverty line, they would need to be earning $14,580 annually, or for 4 people in a household, because it's tied to the number of people in a household, they would need to be earning less than $30,000 annually. So in this example, for this chloropleth, what you see is the lighter blues indicate smaller percentages of House districts with the percentage of residents who are living below the FPL. And the darker blues indicate higher percentages of House districts with individuals or households living below the FPL. And what you can see just in some broad inferences of this map is poverty tends to be concentrated around some of the city centers, but also along the southern part of the state as well there, with those, darker blues ranging from 15.8% of residents to 21.8% of residents, and the darkest blues ranging from about 1/5 of the residents to almost up to 40% of residents. So moving on to the next map there. This is another map that we put together that's also still looking at House districts, where we were looking at housing burden. And housing burden is defined as when an annual household income, 30% or more of an annual household income is spent on housing related expenses. And specific to this map, this is only looking at homeowners in Ohio. So not renters, but homeowners. And what we find, broadly speaking, again, is that the percentage of residents who are experiencing housing burden seems to be most prevalent near the city centers, with areas around Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati experiencing the highest concentrations of homeowner burden. And that's about 21% to quarter at 25% there. And we're just going to look at one more map here, just one more example of how we can use this data. And this map is different from the previous two maps because this is looking at Senate districts. So you can see there, these are kind of larger regions because the Senate districts are larger. And this is looking at much like homeowner burden. This is instead looking at renter burden. This is only looking at all renters in the state who, again, 30% of their annual household income is going towards their housing expenses, of course, including rent. And what we see here, looking at this map, just broad level, is that the largest concentrations of renter housing burden seems to be kind of along that eastern part of the state, specifically up in that northeastern part of the state, with nearly half of the residents, that 47 to 52% of residents or renters in the district experiencing burden. So this is just some very basic overviews of the data and how we'll be interested to manipulate and explore it. And of course, these stories are all much more complicated than these simple observations that I've presented here today. But these are, again, just some of the ways that we're going to be using this data moving forward. And if you're anything like me and you'd prefer to see this data in an Excel file as opposed to a fact sheet, so for the sake of comparison, you can definitely find the Excel file on our Community Solutions landing page for these profiles. And I want to just make a quick plug to keep an eye out for future blogs and projects from Community Solutions using this data. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Alex and Angela and John. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we use the fact sheets and then turn it over to Sarah Hudasek with Advocates for Ohio's Future to talk a little bit more about how to find your own legislator and figure out which fact sheet is relevant to your district, and also how we use these fact sheets and this data to amplify our advocacy. So I'm going to start with just some of the basics. This is, we definitely want these to get into the hands of policymakers whose names are on these fact sheets. And we usually do some work, and I'm sure all of you in the advocacy space are used to this, sort of previewing the release of big projects. And this is one of the biggest ones that we do. It's a great cross-team collaboration internally at Community Solutions, and really one of the things that I get really excited about, having the capacity to pull these together within our research team and then being able to share these with policymakers. I know all of you who do this advocacy work too, we know how important it is to have the data that underpins our advocacy. And this is sort of our shining example of having all of that capacity under one roof. And, we always do a good job of kind of previewing that these are coming out. And this year, especially with the challenges associated with the new district lines, which will be temporary. So sorry, Alex and Angela, I think you know this, but we will be having to redraw all this again for the next iteration of our fact sheets. But this data doesn't exist, as far as we know, anywhere else pulled together this way because of everything that Alex and Angela just talked about, how difficult it is to pull together all of these data points and align them with the new House and Senate district lines. So we were able to really, highlight the fact that this data is pulled together in this way pretty uniquely. We've also shared these via email, and then we'll be planning to send a hard copy. And I know this is sort of like the inside baseball of the advocacy world, but legislators still really like to have hard copies of things in front of them. They have their iPads, but you still see them walking around with a stack of paper. And so being able to print these out and have a handy 2-page list of indicators about what's happening in their districts that apply to many of the committees that they're on is really helpful to have in front of them. We also bring these whenever we have a legislative meeting. So when we're meeting with that legislator, these are tools that we use through, and just for some context, we do these at the beginning of every new General Assembly because there's always new folks seated. This year we had new district lines. So we pull these together every 2 years with updated information and are able to have that information, concrete information to share at every legislative meeting. And the idea behind sort of our internal process of policy and research working together is to say, look, these are the policies that we're trying to make a difference on, make progress on, make changes to that will impact the lives of Ohioans in a positive way. We're able to pull together indicators to the best of our ability that aligns with those policy priority areas. And I think because these also cover so many areas that you all work in, there's relevant data to apply to different policy areas. So I will actually show you what they look like. Hopefully you all received these in your inbox. We released them earlier this month, but we are, I wanted to share sort of what it really looks like, how we kind of walk through these fact sheets with legislators. Apologies for this being a little bit small, but we have the links, relevant links for you to find them all yourselves. Like Alex said, you're able to download the data. We also have the ability for you to download all of the fact sheets so you don't have to do them individually if for some reason you need to print out the whole set, because we've done that before. We kind of print the whole set together so we can look and really pull up the information for different legislators depending on what meetings we have that week or what issues we're working on. We know, different legislators are champions of different issues. So I pulled up House District 4, Mary Lightbody. I live near Columbus. I work in our Columbus office, and she is my state representative. So I pulled her fact sheet. And usually what we do here is, depending on what we're meeting about, we kind of highlight different areas here, but we usually look at, the percentages of the specific that are relevant to that specific district and then compare it to the state. And so in some ways, this House District 4 is, comparable to the full, the overall state of Ohio, but is different also in many ways. So, I would say that we are always using sort of different elements of this as a tool. And so if we're talking about, for example, maternal health, we know that sadly, Black women and women of color disproportionately are impacted by maternal mortality and morbidity compared to white women. And so looking at the number of Black people in the district is something that can be really impactful when we're talking about the statistics related to maternal health. We also, for the first time, sort of displayed some state level facts. Those are where you see the infographics through the fact sheet here, to kind of look at some overarching trends related to different policy areas. So around age and mental health, maternal mortality, poverty and workforce, and Medicaid. And Angela talked a little bit about the Medicaid indicator, but just to sort of point out there, this is one spot where we talk about this with legislators because this American Community Survey data is excellent and reliable. All of the indicators that Angela and Alex talked about are all really important to the work that we do, but all data has some limitations to it. And so that's one of the things that we talk about in terms of this is a 5-year average. The American Community Survey data is also self-reported. So that's something that is, folks, as they're answering the survey, as is in the title, things may be interpreted differently by different people. And so, yes, there are some limitations to it. And one of those spaces where that is pretty evident this year in particular is kind of coming out of the pandemic and not having the full effect of pandemic policies in the range of years we're looking at here for the American Community Survey, really makes an impact on the Medicaid side in particular, because we saw significantly increased enrollment during the pandemic. And so it's important to point that out. It's reliable, it's relevant, it's very important to have this information by district. But one of the things that we talk about and lends to the credibility of the data and the work that we do as advocates backed by data and research is to say, this is going to look different and here's why. We know why. So that's just something that we make sure to share. We are going to talk a little bit more about how to access these individual fact sheets here in a moment, but certainly once you have taken a look at these, if you haven't already, we are happy to field questions. I think Alex is the lucky contact person on the website, so happy to answer questions about anything that you are reading about once you kind of delve into these further. So I will just kind of conclude here with why is it important to have this information at the district level. Policymakers always ask the question, how does this impact my district? And for many indicators, we are able to answer that with these fact sheets. It's also helpful to see for them and for us how districts compare to the state and other districts. And so, if we're talking about making a policy change as it relates to housing affordability, they can kind of see where they stand in their district in terms of renters or homeowners being able to, kind of count in that I am able to afford the place where I live. And if we're trying to make some changes there to make it so that more people enter that category of being able to afford their monthly rent or mortgage payment, they may want to look at this information to see who their allies within their kind of set of colleagues are. They can do that with this information. They can look at this and see, look, here's a whole set of my colleagues who also have a higher rate of housing unaffordability in their district. And, that's a great way to build support for a policy change. And I added this little caveat here, but in years when we have consistent district lines, so over the last the prior few sets of these, we have been able to make some year over year comparisons, or sort of like, what does it look like when you add in those few years and kind of shift the 5-year average. We can't do that this time, so I will caution against that. But as we've looked in the past, it has been interesting to see some of those trend lines. And I am going to turn it over to Sarah to talk a little bit more about how you can kind of engage in finding your legislator, and then also how we use these in our advocacy.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tara, and thanks to the Center for Community Solutions for organizing this webinar and having me. And as always, thanks to Angela and Alex for their outstanding work on these fact sheets. And I'm really excited to be here today to share a little bit about how we use these fact sheets. So my name's Sarah Hudasek. I'm the Policy Associate with Advocates for Ohio's Future, and Kelsey Bergfeld is our director. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan coalition of over 500 state and local health and human services, policy, advocacy, and provider organizations that promote health and human services, budget, and policy solutions so that Ohioans can live better lives. And we really do use community solutions fact sheets in almost every legislative meeting. It's just like Tara said, legislators are hungry for this district level data, so it's really great to be able to provide that for them. So on the next slide, I pulled just a couple of examples of why county level data doesn't provide the level of insight that legislators often need when they're thinking about the needs of their districts. So for example, in larger metropolitan areas like Hamilton County, Franklin County, or Cuyahoga County, like is shown here on the left, there are a large number of districts that are crammed into a really small geographic space, and that's because of the higher populations in our city centers. And we also see this in some rural counties, like on the right, you can see Guernsey County and Belmont County. They're both separated into 2 different districts, but it's not an even split. So you could never just take county level data and divide by 2. So that's why we really need to have district level data in order to extrapolate any kind of information from these statistics, so that we can really sort of get a full picture of what's going on in different districts. So how do you find your district? On the next slide, I included a screenshot of the Ohio Legislature's district search page, where you can use your address to find your state senator, your state representative, and those district numbers for each. And that district number is what you'll need to pull up your legislative district fact sheet. And this link, it should be popped in the chat here in a second, and we'll also send it out with the follow-up materials in the slides. So on the next slide, for example, I might live in District 19 in Cuyahoga County, which is Representative Phil Robinson's district. So if you're using this district number, that's how you would locate this fact sheet on CCS's website. But another way that you can use these is if you're looking at the map, instead of searching for maybe a specific address, you can look at all of the different districts that make up a county, and maybe you want to reach out to every legislator in, say, Cuyahoga County, for example, and you want to talk about a county-wide issue, but you want to use district level data to do it. That's another way that you can really personalize your advocacy and use these fact sheets really to paint a picture when you're talking to legislators. So in Advocates for Ohio's Futures work specifically, we advocate really on a broad range of HHS policies like education, older adults, behavioral health, disabilities, children, you name it. And really our goal is to break down silos between HHS sectors and work to show the interconnection of how each issue area contributes to a person's all around health. And these fact sheets can really help you do that. So this is Representative DJ Swearingen's district, District 89 for the House of Representatives. And this district has one of the highest percentages of adults age 65 and up in the state. And then if you're reviewing this fact sheet, you'll also probably notice that there's a high percentage of unaffordable renter households. And you might also see poverty rates are either higher than state rates or really close to state rates, but also Medicaid and SNAP participation rates are just under the statewide rates. So in this case, there might be an opportunity to approach Representative Swearingen and talk about maybe additional enrollment outreach to older adults who are statistically less likely to participate in SNAP, or maybe affordable housing programs for older adults. And these are both things that Representative Swearingen would likely be really interested in, given the demographics of his district. And then on the next slide, I also included some information about Representative Abdullahi's district, the House District 9. So she has the youngest House district in Ohio. 8.9% of her district is under 5 years old. She also has a really high workforce participation rate in her district. It's a very diverse district. There are high poverty rates, and there's also a high rate of residents without health insurance. So something that this legislator might be interested in is that children's Medicaid eligibility is quite a bit higher than adult Medicaid eligibility. So maybe I'd use this fact sheet to approach Representative Abdullahi about ways to ensure that eligible children are enrolled in Medicaid. See if we can work to lower that uninsured rate. I might talk about barriers to access for people of color accessing safety net programs, or maybe I would want to discuss ways to incentivize the employers that are offering 74% of her district who are participating in the labor force, maybe incentivizing employers to offer more affordable, more accessible employer-sponsored health insurance as another way to kind of tackle that uninsured rate. So those are just a couple of examples of how to use the data in these fact sheets to really paint a picture of what's going on in the districts and what legislators might be interested in investing in to really support their districts and use this data to their advantage. So now I'm excited to turn it over to Emily for some questions and Q&A.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everybody. We've had just a couple questions in the Q&A and a few in the chat. Sarah, I'm going to ask you this question since it's for you. Timothy asked, can you say that again about how you can find / select multiple representatives within a county?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're on the legislature website, then when you're looking at the map, instead of selecting any address or searching for any address, scroll into your county and sort of click through, and you'll be able to see each of the legislators that are in that county. And if you click on where it says, for example, with Representative Robinson, like if you click on where it says District 19, that'll link you over to that representative's page. And it's the same for the Senate. So you can't select more than one legislator as you're going through, but you can click through them successively and use that data that way.
Thank you. We had a question earlier come in that asked, some districts are known to have more highly transient populations, such as those who may be lower income or those who rent versus homeowners. If the AC estimates are gathered annually, how does the ACS account for individuals who may have moved into or out of a given district? Does that reduce the confidence in the accuracy of the data? And Emily Campbell answered this in the Q&A, but I'll also let her answer this out loud as well.
Sure, that's a great question. The important thing is to consider that the ACS estimates and really any data that the Census Bureau puts out are point in time counts of things based on when the information was collected. So for this particular set of legislative district profiles, we're utilizing the 2021 5-year estimates. The mobility of a population doesn't impact the statistical reliability of the data, but this is a place where kind of understanding your communities really helps to recognize, what the data may not be telling you about what's happening in a community and kind of to put things into context. One thing I will say about that, though, is that when we look at the population level, people and the whole populations are a little bit more stable than what it appears in particular neighborhoods. And so some of those things tend to get smoothed out when you're looking even at a geography that is as small as a state legislative district.
Thanks, Emily. We do have a little more time. If anybody else has questions, you can put them in the Q&A or the chat. We did have a question earlier, and I'll throw this one to Alex. To clarify, when you say city centers, are you referring to major counties that house large metropolitan cities, example, Cuyahoga, Franklin, Hamilton? And this is when you were discussing some of the methodology.
The short answer is yes. I was identifying Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati. The kind of thing that this may get a little deeper in a blog, but just eyeballing a map, I was just talking about Ohio's big metropolitan cities.
Great, thanks, Alex. And I don't see any other questions coming in, but maybe we'll wait just maybe 10 more seconds to see if anybody's typing furiously.
Emily, this is John Corlett. I wonder if maybe Sarah or Tara, have you had any experience yet sharing these new profiles with legislators at all? And what's that been like?
Yeah, good question. So we have shared in a few meetings, and actually went to a meeting and a legislator had printed it out already and was sort of showing it to us. So happy to see that they're being used. And I think, the timing is good such that we're in the middle of state budget discussion. And I think some of the data points here are really relevant to some of the conversations around housing affordability and Medicaid coverage. And so, I think that that's a really good tool. And the fact that we have done a good job, I say we collectively, but mostly our research team, and pulling all of that into 2 pages. I often hear legislators ask those questions like mid-committee of, I wonder how this impacts my district, or I'm looking at this and I'm going to ask you a question based on this new research I'm looking at. So certainly very user friendly, and glad to see that it's being used already. But I think Sarah has had a few more meetings these last few weeks since these have come out.
It's absolutely what you said, Tara. The week before these were coming out, we had some legislators asking, but no, what's the percentage of folks on SNAP in my district? What about Medicaid? And we were saying, these resources are coming out so soon, just hold on a little bit longer. So this is a highly anticipated resource that I'm really excited that is here and that we can share it.
And I know that Representative Brewer is actually on the call today, so I want to welcome him. And he's talking about how he's already printed them out and using them as well. So that's really good. The other question I had too, we cover a lot of issues in these profiles, these fact sheets. Are there certain groups you think these would be useful to, in terms of who are doing advocacy around the budget? It would seem like there are some points that are just sort of call out. So I wondered, Sarah or Tara, if you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we have shared another group that we gave a preview to was the Advocates for a House Future group that meets monthly, who Sarah, described as sort of cross-sectional health and human service advocates and membership organizations. So Alex and Angela kind of gave this data overview to that group too, to talk about, how they could kind of see their specific issues there. But as Sarah talked about, like how everything is intertwined. I mean, really, that's our goal here, to show that these trends within a district or the indicators within a district really show kind of like trends around poverty and housing unaffordability, and how different policies can make a difference. So I do think that we've shared these specifically with folks in the aging community to sort of look at the age distribution across a district. And Sarah pointed that out, and how those can be used by different sectors. But Sarah, I don't know if you have anything to add there.
Yeah, it's just like you said, Tara. I think that there isn't a group that wouldn't benefit from using these fact sheets, but if you're kind of just getting started on your advocacy and you're kind of feeling overwhelmed by the budget and you're not sure how to use these in your advocacy, shoot us an email. We would love to kind of get you started and tell you how you might be able to call out some of the data in the fact sheets when you're meeting with your state legislators.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, some of what I think maybe Alex pointed out, the maps that he had, you see these sort of areas of, poverty and housing hardship and places like that. And they're sort of down along that river there in sort of Southeast Ohio and then around urban areas. So it seemed like, to me at least, there could be a lot of common ground around some of these issues. I was really struck by the high rates of housing insecurity in Eastern Ohio, that Northeast Ohio, that far corner of Northeast Ohio. I had not noticed that before, and that really jumped out at me. So
I'll take a moment for a shameless plug. Kyle and I are putting together a blog that's specifically exploring poverty in that region. So keep an eye out for that.
That's great. That's great.
We had another question in the Q&A. I love that Hannah News Services recently added these to their Capital Connection landing page. Will those links be updated when the new profiles are released? We also love that Hannah News Services added it. It's the first time that they have done so. So we're thrilled to be on their landing page. And yes, we certainly hope to keep that going and update those links the next time we do these.
Yeah, and Hannah News has been great over the years, sharing some other resources that we've produced. So really grateful that these tools are getting out there in other ways.
Yeah, this is a project that we support at the Center for Community Solutions with our own resources. We don't ask anyone to pay for this, and we want to make it available to the whole state because we know how important having that data is.
One thing, if I could jump in about kind of the timing of things and when you can expect to see an update, the answer to that is no time soon. So as you heard from Alex and Angela, it's a pretty heavy lift to do the data and to line it up for each legislative district. And so Community Solutions, as John mentioned, does these kind of profiles for a number of different geographies. We probably won't do a significant update of all of the legislative profiles until the next General Assembly. So these are the ones that we will be using over the course of the next couple of years. So once you have them, keep them for a while, because they will be the best available, we think, for a while.
We will update them if there are new legislators in those seats over the course of these 2 years. So it's always important to have the right name with the legislative district when you're taking it to a meeting. But I should, put a plug in too for our other smaller geography level fact sheets that don't have as much of a schedule because they're not necessarily associated with the beginning of a General Assembly like we try to do these ones. But keep an eye out for our community fact sheet page because we do other geographies.
Yeah, particularly in Cleveland, we have them at the neighborhood level and at the city council ward level as well that are fairly recent.
Looks like no more questions, Emily, is that okay?
Correct.
So I will close us out, give you a few minutes back in your afternoon on a Monday. Lots of links here in the chat. We will be sharing the slides, and the recording will be available after the webinar concludes. Lots of good information there, but certainly visit the community fact sheet page and search around for your legislators and all the ones that I guess they all sort of represent all of us, right? So take a look at all the data that's there. I want to thank our team at Community Solutions, Angela Marr and Alex Dorman for pulling all of this together. Really happy to have these tools. We love to have the updated tools for our advocacy. Thank you to Sarah for joining us today and talking about how you all use them at Advocates for Ohio's Future. Thank you to John and Patty and the Emilys on our team for your support today. Want to wish you all a good week. Enjoy the rest of your Monday, and we will see you all on the next webinar. Thank you.